I thought we were celebrating my promotion at a girls' night out. Champagne, laughter, a table at the best restaurant in town. I had no idea that back home, my mother-in-law was sitting at our kitchen table with my husband, systematically dismantling every financial account I owned, laughing at the thought of me standing in a restaurant kitchen in my silk dress, scrubbing pots. The evening began with chandeliers and ended with dish soap. And the worst part? My own husband had handed her the passwords. Our life had been ordinary in all the ways I used to mistake for happiness. We lived in a pale yellow house on Fairview Lane, the kind of house with a wraparound porch that catches the last of the evening light and holds it there, warm and amber, while the neighborhood slowly goes quiet. Marcus and I had been married for 4 years by then. 4 years of morning coffee shared over a kitchen island he'd built himself. 4 years of Sunday farmers markets and evening walks, and the particular comfortable silence of two people who know each other's rhythms by heart. I worked as a regional director at a marketing firm downtown, a title I'd earned through 6 years of relentless work and late nights, and the kind of focus that left absolutely no room for shortcuts. My salary was significant enough to have paid off most of our mortgage ahead of schedule. Significant enough that Marcus and I had separate accounts but shared access, a system that had always seemed like trust made practical, like love expressed in the language of logistics. His mother, Diane, had been a fixture in our lives from the very beginning, and I mean fixture in the architectural sense. Present, load-bearing in certain ways, but easy to overlook because she had simply always been there. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an immaculate appearance. Never a hair out of place, never a sentence left unfinished, never a room entered without making her presence felt. She called Marcus every single day, not every other day. Every day without exception, at 7:30 in the evening, and these calls lasted anywhere from 40 minutes to well over an hour. I had learned to time my showers around them. I had learned to smile when she arrived unannounced on Sunday afternoons, with Tupperware containers of food she insisted I didn't know how to prepare. I had learned to absorb her backhanded compliments. "You look so tired, Clara. Doesn't Marcus make sure you're resting?" The way water absorbs salt, quietly, invisibly, until eventually you stop tasting it and simply accept it as part of the flavor of your life. The one thing Diane had never been able to absorb was the simple, undeniable fact that I owned things, specifically the house. My grandmother had left me money when she passed during our first year of marriage, a substantial inheritance, the result of a lifetime of careful saving and a small property sale in upstate New York. That money had gone directly into the house. My name was on the deed. Marcus's name was there too, but the down payment, the accelerated mortgage payments, the renovation of the kitchen and the back deck, those had all come from me, from my inheritance, from my salary, from the years I had spent building something of my own before I even met him. Diane knew this, and she had never once acknowledged it without finding a way to diminish it. "Of course it's a lovely house," she'd say, smoothing her skirt and glancing around the living room with the practiced eye of someone appraising an estate. "Considering what Clara's grandmother left you both." Both. As if the money had naturally belonged to Marcus, too. As if my grandmother's life savings were a marital asset that Diane had some quiet claim to by extension. I never corrected her. I should have. But I was a peacekeeper by nature, and peacekeepers learn very early that the truth and the peace often cannot occupy the same room at the same time. Marcus appreciated my patience, or I believed he did. He would squeeze my hand under the table when Diane said something particularly stinging, a small private gesture I had always interpreted as solidarity. Looking back now, I understand it wasn't solidarity, it was apology. There is a significant difference between those two things, and I had been too busy being grateful to notice which one I was actually receiving. The girls' night out had been my idea, a celebration I'd been planning for weeks. I had been promoted to vice president of marketing, a position that came with a substantial raise, a new corner office with a view of the river, and a level of professional recognition that made me feel, genuinely and without apology, proud of myself. I'd called my 3 closest friends immediately. Nadia, who had been my college roommate and was now a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could fill a room. Priya, who ran her own small catering business and had an almost supernatural instinct for finding the best restaurants in any city. And Jess, who was my colleague and the one person who had watched me work toward that promotion for 2 full years and had celebrated every single small step with me. We had chosen Marigold, a French-inspired bistro downtown that required reservations 3 weeks in advance, that had the kind of menu where every dish name sounds like a love letter, and a champagne list I had researched with the seriousness of a professional investment. Marcus had seemed genuinely happy when I told him about the promotion. He'd hugged me, brought home yellow tulips, and taken me to dinner that first evening at a small Italian place we'd loved since our early dating years. Everything had seemed right. Diane had sent a text. "Congratulations. Marcus mentioned your news. I hope the extra work doesn't take too much time away from home." I read it twice, decided it wasn't worth decoding, and placed my phone face down on the counter. The week before the dinner, I began noticing small things I could not quite name. Marcus came home late twice without a satisfying explanation. Traffic. Both times, on evenings when I knew his office was a 12-minute drive. He was distracted at dinner, scrolling his phone with the screen tilted slightly away from me, a habit he'd never had before. When I asked if everything was all right, he gave me the warmest, most perfectly calibrated, reassuring smile and said, "Of course, babe. Just a project at work." The smile was flawless. That was almost the problem. It was too practiced, too smooth, landing exactly where it was supposed to with none of the slight asymmetry that genuine emotion leaves on a person's face. Diane called on a Thursday afternoon, which was unusual. Her calls came at 7:30 in the evening, always to Marcus, never to me. This one came at 2 in the afternoon, directly to my cell. She asked in the most casual possible tone whether I'd ever considered refinancing the house. "Interest rates are shifting," she said brightly, as if she monitored financial markets for pleasure, "and I read that it might be a good time to review your arrangement." I told her I was happy with the current mortgage and changed the subject. After the call, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, the phone still warm in my hand, a faint and shapeless unease settling somewhere beneath my sternum like a stone dropping through water. I made a cup of tea, I didn't drink, and told myself I was reading too much into things. The second call came 2 days later, again in the afternoon, again with that same airy conversational tone, as though the thought had just occurred to her between gardening and chamomile. She asked whether Marcus was listed on the primary account for the house. "Just curious, dear, in case of emergencies." I said yes, of course, and yes, he had access, and yes, everything was in order. She said, "Good, good," in the particular way that people say it when they already knew the answer and were simply verifying information they'd gathered from a source closer to home. I noticed it. I filed it under Diane being Diane and went back to work. The Friday before the dinner, Marcus came home with a bottle of Bordeaux and a look on his face that I now recognize as the expression of a man working very hard to appear normal. We sat on the back porch together and watched the last of the summer light drain out of the sky, and he poured the wine and said, "You deserve this celebration, Clara. You really, truly deserve it." I reached for his hand and felt something tighten in my chest, something I couldn't name. Something that wasn't quite doubt and wasn't quite fear, but occupied the territory between them, pressing quietly against my ribs and waiting. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked. It wasn't the question I meant to ask, but it was the one that came out. He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "Better than okay," he said. "I love you." He said it clearly, directly, without hesitation, and I believed him. I chose to believe him. Sometimes belief is an act of will, and sometimes it is the most expensive decision you will ever make. The night of the dinner was everything it was supposed to be. I wore the navy dress I'd bought 2 months earlier and saved for exactly this kind of occasion. Fitted, elegant, the kind of garment that makes you feel like the clearest version of yourself. Nadia arrived at my door first, dressed in deep red, her hair pinned up with that effortless precision I had spent 15 years trying to replicate. Priya and Jess met us at Marigold, and for a moment, standing outside the restaurant in the warm evening air with these 3 women I loved, I felt the specific, uncomplicated joy of a life moving in exactly the right direction. The restaurant was everything I had imagined. Candlelight caught the crystal and sent small constellations across the white tablecloths. The air smelled of brown butter and aged wine and something floral. Roses, from a large arrangement near the host stand that perfumed the entire entrance without overwhelming it. The sommelier was quietly passionate, and when Priya asked about the champagne, he described each option with the reverence of someone discussing music he genuinely loved. We ordered freely, the way you do on a night when the bill doesn't frighten you. 3 starters, 4 entrees, 2 bottles of champagne, a dessert that Nadia declared the best thing she'd eaten in 5 years. We laughed until Jess had to press her napkin to her eyes. It was the best evening I'd had in months. And then the check arrived. Our server set it on the table with the polished discretion of fine dining, and I reached for my purse with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had planned this evening carefully, who had checked her account balance that very morning, who had set aside money specifically for this celebration. I handed over my credit card without a second thought. The server returned perhaps 3 minutes later with the kind of neutral, professionally composed expression trained to conceal genuine discomfort. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said quietly, "but your card has been declined." I stared at him. "There must be a mistake. Please try again." He'd already tried twice, he explained gently. Same result both times. I handed him my debit card. The account connected directly to my primary checking, the account I had been funding for 6 years. He left. He returned. Same expression, same quiet apology. The table had gone entirely still. Nadia was looking at me with an expression carefully held in neutral, the particular way a good friend looks when she is trying not to let you feel ashamed. Priya had already reached into her own bag. Jess had her phone out. I sat very still while something cold moved through me from my center outward, something that had nothing at all to do with the temperature of the room. I opened my banking app with fingers I had to consciously instruct to remain steady. The account balance read $0.14, not overdrawn, not flagged for suspicious activity, not temporarily frozen with a fraud protection message. $0.14, as if every dollar I had earned and saved and carefully managed over years of disciplined work had simply been lifted from the account like furniture from a room, cleanly, completely, leaving nothing behind but the echo of where it had been. I sat with the phone in my hand and the candlelight moving softly around me and the smell of roses and butter and cold champagne, and the world did not pause. The table beside us went on laughing. The sommelier poured something golden across the room. Everything continued exactly as it had been, and I sat at the center of all of it with a sound building in my ears that was not quite a sound, more like pressure. Like the moment before a very large storm when the air changes its texture entirely and the birds go silent all at once. I called Marcus. 4 rings. Voicemail. I called again immediately. Voicemail again. I typed, "Call me right now." 2 blue check marks appeared within seconds. He had read it. He did not call. Priya had quietly covered part of the bill with her own card. Jess had covered another portion with hers. But the total was significant. This was a proper celebration dinner, chosen and anticipated for weeks, and between the 2 of them, they hadn't reached the full amount. The manager appeared at our table himself, a slim man in his 50s with silver at his temples and the deliberate composure of someone who had navigated difficult situations long enough to do it without visible effort. He introduced himself as Mr. Hargreaves and spoke quietly, leaning slightly toward me, his voice carrying just far enough for our table, and no further. He said that in circumstances where a check could not be covered in full, the restaurant had a standing house policy. He paused there. That pause told me he did not enjoy what came next. The policy, he explained, was that the remaining party could work off the balance in the kitchen. The silence that fell over our table was absolute. Nadia set down her glass. Priya looked at the manager with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between disbelief and the very beginning of fury. Jess made a sound that she immediately swallowed, and I, in my navy dress, at the table I had reserved, at the dinner I had planned for weeks to celebrate something I had worked 6 years to earn. I looked at Mr. Hargreaves and felt the last warm pieces of the evening dissolve around me like sugar in cold water. But underneath the humiliation, underneath the shock and the cold and the pressure building in my ears, something else was forming. Something harder. Something that didn't burn. It crystallized. "How much is the remaining balance?" I asked. My voice came out level, measured. I did not recognize it as my own. He told me the figure. It was not small. "Give me 20 minutes," I said. I excused myself from the table and walked to the hallway near the restrooms, where the noise of the restaurant softened to a manageable murmur. I tried Marcus one more time. The call went straight to voicemail without ringing. He had turned his phone off entirely. Then I called my father. My father, Robert, is a man of very few words and very decisive action. He had never warmed to Marcus with the enthusiasm I'd hoped for. Not disliked him exactly, but maintained a quiet, watchful reserve that I had attributed to protectiveness rather than instinct. He is a man I should have listened to far more carefully. When he picked up on the second ring and heard my voice, he said nothing for 3 full seconds after I finished explaining what had happened. Then, "Stay where you are. Don't go into that kitchen. I'm calling your bank right now." He hung up before I could respond. I stood in the hallway and breathed. The wallpaper was dark green, patterned with small gold leaves, and I focused on it while I waited, tracing the repeating design with my eyes, something to anchor me to the physical world while everything else came loose. 8 minutes later, my father called back. His voice had changed. It was quieter now. That specific quietness that in my father's case means something very serious and very controlled. "Clara," he said, "the transfers were authorized using Marcus's login credentials. 3 separate transactions over 2 days. The largest one was processed this afternoon at 4:17, just before your dinner reservation." A pause. "There was also an authorization request submitted yesterday to add a third party as account beneficiary. The name on the request was Diane Whitmore." I pressed my back against the green wallpaper and closed my eyes. "She planned this for the dinner," I said. It was not a question. "It appears so," my father said. "I've already called David." David Chen was my father's attorney, a quiet, thorough man who had handled my grandmother's estate. "He'll meet you at the house tomorrow morning at 9. Don't go home tonight. Stay with Nadia." I walked back to the table and looked at my 3 friends. I said, quietly and without drama, "I know what happened. My father is handling the bank. Mr. Hargreaves. I'll need a full itemized receipt with your name, the date, and the time. The remaining balance will be settled by wire transfer before 9 tomorrow morning, with written confirmation from my attorney." Something shifted in Mr. Hargreaves's expression. A faint recalibration, a slight softening. "Of course, ma'am," he said. "That will be perfectly acceptable." We did not wash any dishes that night, but the fact that it had been intended, that someone had sat somewhere in calculated comfort and imagined me in an apron behind that kitchen pass, humiliated in front of the women I loved most on the night of my greatest professional achievement, that image lived inside me all the way to Nadia's apartment and did not leave. I stayed with Nadia that night. She made tea and didn't push me to talk, which is the best thing a person can do when shock is still metabolizing into something usable. I sat on her sofa under a blanket that smelled of laundry detergent and cedar, and I looked at my phone, and I thought about Marcus, and I thought about Diane, and I tried to locate grief inside myself, tried to find the place where love had been and measure what remained. What I found instead was clarity. Cold, clean, absolute clarity. The kind that comes not from thinking, but from finally, irrevocably seeing. I went home at 7 the next morning. Marcus's car was in the driveway. He was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee. And when he heard me come through the door, something moved across his face that I recognized immediately. Not guilt, not quite, but the expression of a man who has been waiting for a consequence and is watching it arrive. He set the cup down. He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said. "Clara, I can explain. Don't." The word landed like a stone dropped from a great height, and he stopped. I sat down at the kitchen table, the table Marcus had built, in the house my grandmother's money had bought, and I looked at my husband and said, "Tell me how long." The silence stretched. 6 seconds. 7. 8. 6 months, he said. His voice was barely above a murmur. "She came to me 6 months ago with the idea. She said she just wanted security, that after everything she'd done for us, she deserved stability. She didn't want much, she said, just access, just to be on the accounts, just in case." He was looking at the table. He had not looked at me once. I told her no at first, but she kept saying it was family money, that your grandmother would have wanted. "My grandmother," I said, "never met your mother." He flinched. "I know." "She drained my accounts 2 days before my promotion dinner," I said, "so I would be humiliated in front of my friends, so I would have nothing. That was the plan. She wanted me to feel like I had nothing. So I would need her, need you. So the house would feel like hers, because she'd made me small enough to stop defending it." "I didn't know about the timing," he said. His voice cracked. "I didn't know she was going to do it that night." "You gave her your login credentials," I said. "You added her as a beneficiary. You turned off your phone." Each sentence landed separately. "You knew." The silence this time was different. It was not a man searching for words. It was a man who had run out of places to hide. At 9 o'clock exactly, David Chen arrived. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table without ceremony and opened it without once looking at Marcus. He had already contacted the bank and initiated a reversal of all unauthorized transfers, pending a fraud investigation. He had drafted a cease and desist letter to Diane Whitmore, prohibiting further contact with my accounts, my employer, and my property. He slid both documents across the table to me. Then he looked at Marcus for the first time and said simply, "You'll want your own legal counsel. Today, if possible." Marcus looked like a man watching the floor disappear beneath his feet. 3 weeks later, Diane came to the house. She let herself in through the front door with a key Marcus had given her 2 years earlier. A key I had never known existed, discovered only when David ran a full audit of every access point to our shared assets. That revelation was its own small devastation. She walked into the kitchen on a Tuesday morning when she had calculated incorrectly that I would be at work. I was sitting at the kitchen table with David on speakerphone, reviewing the final paperwork on a full account separation. She stopped when she saw me. For just one moment, one brief, unguarded moment, her face was not the face of a concerned mother or a wounded family matriarch. It was the face of someone who had miscalculated and knew it. "Clara," she said, "I think we should talk." "We are talking," I said. "David, can you hear her?" "Clearly," David said through the speaker. Diane looked at the phone, then at me. The color shifted in her face in a way that no amount of composure could fully control. "Everything you say right now is being recorded," I said, "with your knowledge, as I'm informing you of that fact. You're welcome to leave or to explain to my attorney how you came to be listed as a beneficiary on my primary account without my consent." She left without another word. She set her keys on the counter, the keys to my house, and she walked out, and I heard her car pull away down the street, and I sat with my hands flat on the table and breathed in and breathed out and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been held tight for years. The civil fraud claim was filed that afternoon. The bank reversed every transfer within 10 days, citing unauthorized access. Marcus moved out in the third week of October, not because I threw him out dramatically, but because we had a conversation at that same kitchen table, calm and final, in which we both acknowledged that what had been done could not be undone, and what was left was not something either of us should call a marriage. He wept. I didn't. I had already done my grieving alone at Nadia's in the first night when the shock was still warm. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. The house stayed mine. It had always been mine, legally and factually, and David made certain that remained unambiguous in every document filed. Diane received formal legal notice that any further attempt to access or influence my assets would result in criminal charges. She's not contacted me since. I planted roses in the back garden in the spring, yellow ones along the fence line, where the evening light falls best. I sit on the back porch sometimes in the hour before dark, with tea and the particular silence of a house that belongs entirely to me, and I think about all the things I once mistook for security. The hand squeezed under the table, the smile that landed too perfectly, the belief, chosen deliberately and at great cost, that love and truth could always share the same room. They can. I know that now, but only when both people in the room are willing to be honest about what they're actually holding. My grandmother understood that. She built her life alone, carefully, on her own terms, and she left me the means to do the same. It took me longer than it should have to understand that her real gift wasn't the money. It was the example. The roses bloomed in June. They were the best thing in the garden. They still are.